After spending almost 2 weeks playing and completely finishing Team Sonic Racing, I decided that I wanted to look at this game again and provide a more in-depth look at it, because whilst I still hold the firm belief that Team Sonic Racing is a very good title, the more that I play of it, the more issues I see, and I just can't decide if these issues were the result of poor design or a constraint due to the obvious lower budget that Sumo were given in order to make the game. I would like to state from the outset that whilst I may seem overly negative in this video, I do not mean to be. I consider Team Sonic Racing to be, at worst, a good game, and at best, a fantastic title. I've had a lot of fun with it, but that said, there are several issues with the game and the way it's designed that I would like to talk about, which, inevitably, that means talking about a lot of the negatives. Right away, I'd like to address something which I can see some people instantly rushing to the comment box to type in a way to dismiss any criticisms that I might raise. Despite claims that this is its own standalone title, and not a sequel to All-Stars Racing Transformed or the original All-Stars Racing, it's more than valid to compare this game to those titles. The main justification I have for this is that whilst the core gameplay is completely different to those previous titles, the fact remains that the game does place an exception on the player to have at least played the previous two games, or learn the advanced and even fundamental rules and gameplay mechanics that were introduced in those two previous titles. If the player doesn't do this, they will have a much lesser experience, and they might even be hindered in their progress during this game. In terms of the team play mechanics, the new gameplay experience in this one, the game does a commendable job of explaining these to the player, something which I'll discuss momentarily, but for basic and advanced solo actions, such as the ability to perform mid-air tricks, changing direction whilst drifting, as well as some simple tasks like forward and reverse weapon firing, these actions were introduced in either the original All-Stars Racing or in the sequel All-Stars Racing Transformed, and they're not explained through the gameplay, nor with in-game prompts. Instead, they're hidden away in the tips section, which, by its nature, is not a good method to explain your game to players. Without knowing these gameplay mechanics, you will struggle with the game, and I've even seen it myself. I've been in online matches where players don't do mid-air tricks, and when I've asked them why afterwards, they tell me I didn't know it existed. And I've even seen comments when I've been streaming the game myself from people who have asked me, how do you fire the cube wisp in front of you? ASRT does explain how to fire weapons in multiple directions, and it even has a trophy for doing so, but in TSR, there is no indication that you can fire weapons forwards and backwards. And another reason why I think it's perfectly valid to compare this title to the previous, Team Sonic Racing actually contains ASRT specific lines of code. So whilst you may claim it's a standalone title, it absolutely demands and requires the player to have played the previous titles, or at least be prepared to learn the fundamentals and then the advanced movements and mechanics from those previous titles in order to progress. So how can you say it's not valid to judge them or compare them when the game relies so much on them in order for the player to be able to progress, but doesn't actually explain those mechanics in-game or through any on-screen prompts? So with that in mind, let's take a look at how the game does explain the brand new team play mechanics, because in my opinion, this is something that the game does extremely well, if not outstandingly well. The obvious example of how the game introduces the player to the team play mechanics is in the form of the slipstream. The player doesn't need any explanation of either what this is or if it's beneficial to travel in the slipstream trail. It's a brightly coloured golden path that the player sees emerging from another player on their team. It just begs the player to drive in it. So if the player does drive in it, shortly after doing so, their controller vibrates and particles generate on their vehicle. The player knows that this slipstream is having some kind of effect. They're not slowing down, they're not being hindered. Everything suggests it's a positive one. And what happens when they leave the slipstream? They're given a huge boost of speed, and it charges the ultimate team meter. It's a splendid example example of educating the player through the actual gameplay. Explanations of how to pass items and doing the skim boost is also handled very well. With the skim boost, if you see a player on your team ahead of you, you cannot help but notice a yellow aura around your teammate indicating where they are on the track. Can't help but just drive closer towards it. You've already been explained that anything gold and yellowy is a good thing due to the slipstream. So when you actually do drive close to your teammate, they rush ahead and you get a charge on your ultimate meter. Now, some people might be afraid that the team play mechanics will only really work if you're online and you're playing with a group of friends. But Team Sonic Racing, I firmly believe that the AI in this game cheats to benefit the player. If you request an item from your AI-controlled teammates, they will always have an item ready to give to you, provided they've passed by any item block on the map, regardless as to if they actually hit an item box or if there were any items there available at that time. So some people might instantly think that this isn't very good because the game is cheating in favour of the player and reducing the difficulty. But the issue here is if the game didn't do that, if it treated the situation as it actually happened, the AI bots didn't pick up an item, if the player requests help from their AI characters and they don't provide it, it's going to feel like the team play mechanics just don't work at all. And this can be passed into the online experience. Why would players ever request an item when in single player mode everything has told them this doesn't work, or it's very rare that this works? So it's kind of a cheat, but you can fully understand and see why it's being done. And it's a very good and very grown up decision, so we should definitely applaud them for doing this. So whilst the team play mechanics can seem quite deep and complex in many ways, they're easily communicated to the player without the need for long tutorials or even for the player going into the text explanations. And this is vital in order for the player to actually engage with the game and have fun with it without constantly being taken out of the experience or having to follow a slow step-by-step tutorial. It allows them to get straight into the action and learn whilst playing, and due to how well they've designed it with visual cues, vibration feedback through the controller, and even positive reinforcement through the in-game radio, the player is quickly able to learn these complex structures and gameplay mechanics with minimal effort. However, whilst this core team play gameplay is explained extremely well, the solo gameplay or more traditional racing gameplay is just barely explained well at all. And this is what I was talking about earlier, how the game places an expectation on the player to either be familiar with the previous titles or forces the player to learn these on their own without any guidance whatsoever from the game. And this is a little bit of one of the negatives in terms of the actual how the gameplay is explained to the player. Because whilst the core team play aspect is explained very well, the player still needs to master these mechanics which are introduced in ASR and ASRT. Otherwise, for the later races, and especially when online, they're just not going to do very well at all. Despite this, how does the new team play mechanic actually influence the single player and the online player experience? Does it differ enough from traditional racing games to be considered either a positive or something that stands out which is fun and engaging? Well, the answer to that is yeah, it is fun and engaging, and it does radically change how a player will approach this game. For example, in traditional games where it's just you against the rest of the track, you'll often want to go for the quickest racing line, and sometimes this might mean performing very wild, very flamboyant moves on the track. But in TSR, you have to drive more careful and more methodical, especially when in the lead, in order to assist the racers behind you to stay in your slipstream. It often means that players will avoid travelling in the fastest racing line possible in favour of helping the rest of the team catch up with them. And this gives a radically unique and, dare I say, incredibly fun experience compared to more traditional games. So now that we've actually talked about the gameplay mechanics and what you actually do to win a race, let's talk about the track designs that you actually use all this information on. TSR has some absolutely outstanding racetracks, some of the best in the entire Sonic Racing trilogy, but it also has one or two which are just really poor, especially when even compared to some tracks within this one game itself. It gives you a constant feeling of, are these tracks this poor because of the limitations in the game budget? Or are they poor because of just poor design choices? So I'm going to highlight a few tracks which I think illustrate this feeling that I've got really well. So to start with, I'm going to focus on a couple of negatives. In general, when compared to ASRT, the tracks are indeed quite poor. In ASRT, due to the transforming nature of that game, tracks would change and offer completely new routes per lap, or there would be dynamic effects happening all the time, which made the tracks highly entertaining, and it made you feel like you were driving through a living world that was constantly evolving and changing. It really did make you feel part of the world it represented, instead of it just being a static theme that you're driving through. And there's two good examples of this in the game, where it feels like some dynamic elements that would have helped improve the overall experience were going to be included, but they were either removed or they just didn't go there or even didn't think to do it. One such example is in the track Ice Mountain. The player drives around a snow and ice themed environment. There are slippery hazards and even slower snowy surfaces all over the track. But near to the end of the track, a volcano erupts and it looks amazingly cool. It dominates the skyline and lava comes crashing down towards you and absolutely nothing happens. It doesn't impact the track in any way. It feels like this huge volcano should be having an impact on the track, be it melting some of the snow and ice to create water hazards on the course, or even causing some of the ramps and jumps to become unstable and possibly even collapse, making some serious hazards. There's so much that this could do, but it doesn't do any of it. Another track which seems to have the potential for a dynamic effect is Haunted Castle. At the end of this course, the player enters a flooded sewer with pipes that has water bursting out of it, pushing players into a water trap that slows them down and can completely mess up their car's handling. But in the time trial mode, and even in side missions set on this track, this water hazard is missing. The player is able to drive in this sewer section without any hindrance whatsoever. And this lets me to think, why couldn't the first lap have been an empty sewer, which the players can just drive freely without any problems? And then on the second lap, the pipes begin pumping water into the track. These can still push the players into the center, but now they think, oh man, there's a new hazard I better be aware of for the final lap. And then when they come to the final lap, they see that the sewer is now starting to flood, giving them more hazards to think about. The first time this happens, this could be quite a surprise for the player, and it would really make them think. In future games, it even offers them possible tactical moves to do against either computer-controlled or human-controlled players. But it's the same setup every time. The sewer is flooded and there's water pipes bursting water in that'll hit the players. So now I'd like to talk about another track which initially I really enjoyed, but over time as I've played it more and more, I've grown to just really dislike, and that track is Sky Road. On this track, the player starts on the city streets, and they're very quickly thrown thousands of feet into the air, high above the clouds, and they land on a glass road. At times, players can even bounce off hot air balloons before returning back to the track, and on the very final section, they fall down a huge ramp and emerge into a sewer before then being catapulted back up into the sky. This sounds like a really cool track, but it's not. It has a lot of visual spectacle, but that novelty quickly wears off and you just see how dull this track actually is. For instance, the first jump is nearly 1/4 of the entire track, which you as the player have very little control over. It's near completely automated and you have no control. But the main problem I have with this track is even after this huge automated section, is just how dead and lifeless it is. No, really. When you're driving above the clouds, there's barely any movement at all. Even the clouds themselves are so static and lifeless. Whilst there's hot air balloons dotted around, just watch them next time. They're completely motionless. There's no birds, despite the fact you're in the sky, no aircraft, and even when you return to ground level, there really isn't much of anything. The only sign of movement and of life from the entire track comes from the swinging blades in the sewer section. But when you're in the sky section of track, which is for the majority of the game, nothing happens. It looks like they just forgot to animate huge sections of this. But this stage is based off the Sonic Generations version of Rooftop Run, which actually has an airship in it. So why is this not here? Why is there absolutely no air traffic or anything going on in the sky portion of this stage, which is the majority of this track? Virtually anything could be done to bring some life to it. But even if you excuse the fact there wasn't any Sonic-y assets here, there's no movement in the clouds, there's no movement in the hot air balloons. It just feels like a fake painted movie backdrop, and that's why I just find it so boring. Whereas when you compare this track to another Rooftop Run inspired track, Market Street, this course is incredible. It has such an incredible variety to it that the player never feels bored. It's a course that's full of shortcuts and has loads of alternative routes, but it also has a lot of life in the stages, including dynamic hazards. And another way this track sets itself apart from Sky Road is that it has verticality to it. There are multiple instances where the players can either take to the rooftops or drive actually through the market street itself. There's very little benefit to either route outside of time trial mode, but it's so much fun to do this, to pick which way you want to go, and it just adds so much variety to this one simple course. And another thing which suggests that somebody was putting a lot of care and attention into this track is that there's so many little hidden extras that you can do. None of this really benefits you in any way, but it's just fun. It's so much fun to do these things. For example, one little thing that I found that I've not seen many people actually do is on the very last section of the track, when you get to the actual market street, it's possible to drop down off the rooftops and bounce your car off the market stalls themselves. It has no speed penalties and basically catapults you back up to the buildings. And you can do some insane stunts, and it's just so much fun to do. It's no benefit, but it's so much fun. And you just question, why isn't there other little fun pieces like this in any of the other tracks? A couple of tracks have them, but so many just have nothing, much like Sky Road. But there's also a track in the game which has the opposite problem, and that track is Mother's Canyon. There is a lot going on in this track. Near to the end of the course, there's a series of badniks that fly through a tunnel past the player. Or how about at the start? And then for a huge part of the track, you see the Mother Wisp slowly follow you around a huge curve. And it's a really cool scene the very first time you see it. You really do feel like you are on Planet Wisp driving through the area. The problem, though, is that the actual track itself is so boring. Half of the track is a long bend with absolutely nothing on it. There's no boosters, there's no item boxes, there's a couple of rings, but really, nothing is happening on this section, and it's quite long. And then there's a similar problem shortly after this. There's a very long straight section with a couple of very easy to miss hazards. It's again a very dull piece of track, and it all adds up to a track which has some incredible scenery that makes you truly believe you are travelling through Planet Wisp. But the actual track in terms of its design is just painfully boring. But in terms of all the complaints and praises that I've raised against all the other tracks so far, there's one track in this game which I think might not only be the best track in the entire game itself, but a strong contender for best track in the entire Sumo Digital Sonic Racing trilogy. And that track is Boo's House. So I know that it's very easy when talking about video games to say, oh, this is the greatest thing ever, oh, it is. And I know that Boo's House is in fact a very popular track at the moment. A lot of people really enjoy this course because it's quite a decent length in terms of how long it'll take you to beat the track, and the music is some of the best in the game. And there's also a great big giant King Boom Boo flying around, what's not to like? But in terms of the complaints and the praises that I've raised against the other tracks so far, Boo's House does everything right and then has some extra little bits of details in it which I just sit here and think, why can't all the courses have this in them? For example, let's just actually talk about the track itself for a bit. A small part of this track takes place outside the pyramid. In this area, you're in a very sandy canyon and there's sand blowing up as you drive through it. It really does feel like this area is alive with activity and that the weather is starting to take a turn for the worst. But when you enter the pyramid, this sense of life continues. Dust which constantly falls from the ceiling as you drive through it. It really does feel like you're exploring an ancient tomb, and as the race intensifies, all this combined together gives you this constant feeling that the structure is going to collapse at any moment, and the pyramid is full of different corridors and chambers, and you constantly descend deeper into it, and all the time evil ghosts stalk the corridors and lay traps for you. It's just a fantastic stage. It truly feels alive, and it makes you feel like you're exploring an ancient pyramid in Sonic's universe. So this track isn't just the best track in my opinion for the fact it feels so alive and fully immerses you to believe that you actually are inside a pyramid in Sonic's world. This track has a bit of a trump card, and when I realised this, I was blown away. It really showed just how much care and how much detail had gone into designing this track, and I wish all the other tracks had had a similar thing put into it. This track actually has its own story and narrative. The story itself is split over the standard 3-lap race, so I'm going to tell you what I think the story is. The races start outside the pyramid. The weather starts to take a harsh turn, so they decide to take shelter in the pyramid away from the sandstorm. And when the leader enters the pyramid, they spot a ghost, but the rest of the group doesn't believe them. Now, if you're the leader of the race at this point, when you enter the pyramid, you'll see King Boom Boo. He's always there, but he immediately flies off and hides behind a pillar. The rest of the players who follow you in don't get as good a look at him. After the racers enter the pyramid, they start to explore this initial chamber, but then they realise they can't get out the way they've come in. There's no way to do so, the door has closed. Okay, a bit of fun here, but you can't go backwards out the door, the game doesn't allow you to do this. So where do you go? The leader spots a route through a corridor which takes you deeper into the pyramid, and everybody else follows him. So you start driving down a corridor, and then you quickly realise, and this is a common theme throughout this track which I absolutely loved, you are constantly descending further and further down, deeper into the pyramid, and all the turns always keep you confined within the pyramid structure itself. You never feel like you're driving outside the perimeter of this pyramid structure. You're constantly descending down. They're descending down further into the depths, towards the awaiting evil. And as they descend further, they enter various corridors and chambers. Some are patrolled by ghosts who set traps for the racers, and some get lost in secret passages, also known as shortcuts in this game. And eventually, King Boom Boo returns to torment the racers, but then he retreats to the very centre of the pyramid. The racers then enter the chamber for a final showdown to stop King Boom Boo from escaping to the outside of the world. They do so, and a portal opens up, taking them back to the outside of the pyramid. Okay, so there's a little bit of fun and a little bit of artistic license there. But the key points here are that it doesn't feel like a racetrack. It feels like our racers are actually exploring and then become trapped inside a pyramid, and they're trying to get out. And constantly, all the time you're driving through this pyramid, you're descending further and further down into the depths. There's particles of dust crashing down from the ceiling. There's ghosts tormenting you. You feel like at any moment the whole pyramid could just collapse. It's a hell of a story, and with all the environmental stuff and all the little tiny bits of details, your imagination can go crazy. It's such an incredible track that truly feels alive. It also has just an amazing story running through it. So some of you might be sat there thinking, oh, this is a bit of a stretch. They wouldn't put a story into their tracks. But Sumo have done this. They did it in the previous game, and this has been confirmed multiple times by several Sumo Digital staff, including the track designer Tim Spencer and executive producer Steve Lysett. In the Curian Mansion-inspired track, the track tells the story of the wedding of Zombio and Zombiko. The first lap, we see Zombio enjoying his bachelor party. He's bouncing on a trampoline. In lap 2, we see the undead guests arriving, and we actually even see Zombio trying on his tuxedo. And then in the final lap, we see that the wedding party is fully underway, and the undead are dancing at the nighttime disco. And at the very final end of the final lap, we see the actual wedding. Even if you don't want to believe there is a story in Boo's house, certainly not to the level that I've just described, the fact that the position of King Boom Boo and the smaller ghosts change during each lap sets it apart from most of the other tracks, which barely change at all. It's a magnificent track in this game, and it deserves the highest praise for all the detail it put in. But it presents a really good example to the point I raised at the very start of this video. Why are parts of the game done extremely well, yet others are done not so well? And the point really isn't clear, as if it's due to budget restraints or poor design. So I've gone through several tracks. Some of them clearly had a lot of time and effort put into them, yet we have others which just feel lazy and in some cases outright boring to play. So they clearly had the talent in the staff to make some outstanding courses. There are others which are just so poor, which in this instance makes me lean towards budget constraints over a talent one. But as beautiful as most of the courses are, and as fun as they are, there is an overarching issue with most of the tracks in TSR, especially when you compare it to the previous game. And that issue is that most of the tracks just feel like artificially created race courses. So some of you are probably now screaming, of course they're race tracks, it's a racing game! Let me explain this. Almost every track in Team Sonic Racing, with the exception of Boo's house and maybe one or two others, it feels like an actual racetrack was constructed in a location specifically for racing. Take the three first tracks of the game. We've got Wisp Circuit, Mother's Canyon and the Doctor's Mine. All of these look like a race course. They look like they were just built in the locations to race on. They don't feel like a natural route, or as if the racers are trying to escape or battle through a pre-existing world or environment. And this is also true for the courses Lost Palace, Market Street, Sand Road, and several other tracks in the game. Now compare what the majority of the tracks are like in ASRT. The Afterburner track, Carrier Assault, that doesn't feel like a pre-built race course. That feels like you're in the middle of a sea battle. That feels like you're almost taking part in a war. It doesn't feel like someone built a racetrack for you to travel on. The same goes for Graveyard Dig. That feels like you're trapped in the House of the Dead, trying to find a way out. Yeah, there's a wedding going on, but it feels like you're trying to get out of there. Rogue's Landing doesn't feel like a race course. It feels like you're actually driving through a pirate port. Now, TSR does have one track that removes the feeling of an artificial raceway very well, and again, it's Boo's house. The moment you enter the pyramid, it doesn't feel like you're on a racetrack. It feels like you're trapped inside a pyramid trying to find your way out. But even with the tracks in ASRT, which do feel like constructed raceways, such as Outrun Bay and Shibuya Downtown, they don't feel like closed racetracks. In both Outrun and Shibuya Downtown, they have NPC traffic driving on the course, and this helps the player feel like they're driving through a real city. It's not a closed raceway, whereas Team Sonic Racing will have the odd egg robo that's wandered out of the stands onto the track, but there's nothing that makes the player feel like the racers are the ones who are the intruders. It always feels like this was a constructed race course, and any hazard on the track is the result of someone just wandering onto it. So I'm going to move away from the tracks now and talk about one of the more controversial issues in this game. It's time to talk about the mods. So the biggest controversy that this game found itself in is down to the fact that when it was announced, it was quickly revealed that there would only be 15 characters. In my last video, I explained a lot about how the characters are split into 3 different classes, so I'm not going to repeat myself for this one, but to compensate for the lack of characters, there is the mod system, and this is a somewhat nice compromise for the small character roster. You see, the mods don't just change the vehicle's stats, but they radically alter the look of the vehicle, and in total there are 343 possible vehicle combinations per character, and that doesn't include the various paint jobs you can also apply to the vehicles. However, the mod system does actually have a number of problems, and again, it comes down to the question, are these problems a result of poor design or a constriction of the low budget? So let's start off with the obvious. Each racer has a set of standard parts. The player can then unlock an additional 3 tyres, engines, and body parts per character. They can then unlock legendary variations of those 3 extra car parts. When the player unlocks a standard mod, a very simple music chime plays, and for the legendary variant, the music is far more dramatic, and the words legendary appear before the description of the actual car part. It genuinely gives the player the impression that the legendary mod is the better mod to use. In fact, I actually caught this on video when I was unlocking mods during a stream. Just pay attention to how the game presents these 2 mods. Pay specific attention to the actual music used.
Whirlwind wheels! Legendary whirlwind wheels!
I don't know about anyone else, but to me, the legendary mod just looks like it should be a better mod, given how the game presents it. Except it's not. The stats on a legendary mod are exactly the same as those for a standard variant.
I will switch to the legendaries in 3, 2, 1, switch. And the stats stay exactly the same, making the legendaries absolutely pointless.
Not only that, but legendary mods end up with this garish yellow colour that can't be modified with either paint or even have a unique vinyl put on it. And whilst I know that taste is subjective, in my opinion, the legendary mods are the most pointless things to unlock in the whole game. Why would you use them when the standard mods are the same in terms of look and stats, but you can further customize them with different paint schemes and even place visual vinyls onto them? It comes back to budget versus poor design decisions. I have to lean again towards budget constraints on this one. I get the feeling that the legendaries were supposed to be more effective or different in some way to the standard counterparts. I can't believe they went through the process to design so many uniquely looking vehicles, all with different effects and different stats, only to leave in the presentation of the legendary mods, which have the same stats and in terms of the lack of customizable options, are a worse pick for a player. There isn't even a trophy for unlocking all legendary mods. The only trophy that is related to unlocking mods will pop when the standard mods are unlocked. The legendaries do not affect this trophy unlock whatsoever. They're completely pointless. And another huge problem, especially when compared to ASR and ASRT, is that as a player, it never feels anywhere near as exciting to unlock a mod for a pre-existing character than to unlock a completely new character. Looter shooter games, as well as RPG developers, are very well aware of this issue. They know that giving players rewards of new weapons is far more enjoyable than unlocking modifications or upgrades or parts for existing ones. TSR lacks that same incredible moment that you got in the previous two games, when you unlock and try out a new racer for the first time. But the biggest problem I had with the mod pod system is that it takes far too long to unlock everything, even when you have enough tokens. To actually get enough tokens isn't much of an issue. When you complete story mode 100%, you should have more than enough tokens. In total, I think I spent nearly 7,000 credits, somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour, to actually unlock all the car parts. This is really unreasonable. I shouldn't have to wait that long to unlock in-game rewards, especially when I have all the credits to do so. Literally, the only benefit this mod unlock system has that I can think of is that, thankfully, it's actually very generous with the car part unlock rate, and it's not based on a real-world paid-for system. But I would have preferred it if you could actually pick which racer you wanted to unlock mods for. Even if it gave you a random one, it would just be a lot better to do. So I'm now going to move on to the adventure mode, which is also known as story mode in this game. There are some very strange design decisions here which I really do need to address. First, let's talk about the actual story itself. It's not very good, but let's be real here. It's a spin-off racing title. It was never going to be amazing. However, that said, the actual dialogue between the characters is pretty good. There are one or two awkward moments, but for the most part, the dialogue is just great. It's quite self-aware, but even the non-self-aware moments are just fantastic. There's also been a few voice actor changes with some characters, and I find myself enjoying these new voices a lot more than I thought I would do. Even characters who normally don't get a lot of time to shine really do in this game. Big the Cat especially has some great moments. There's one moment which stuck out for me in particular. All the other characters in this game, for a large part of it, are convinced that Dodenpah is evil, but Big points out very early on, before every other character in the game, that this can't be the case because the Wisps like him, and they can sense evil and don't like hanging around with it. Blaze's new voice actress is also really good, and I now want Blaze to appear in a lot more games. Her delivery and performance might be some of the best to ever appear in any Sonic game for years. It was such a wonderful surprise to see so much effort go into the dialogue, the casting, and the performances for what is just a budget spin-off title. But the story does have a huge flaw with its design. It becomes very tedious. Each area is structured almost identically to the previous. Only the side missions offer some variety, and each area always begins with a couple of team races, and they always end with either a GP and or a survival race. It's so repetitive that I found myself having to take breaks from playing the game. And it's a game that I was enjoying, but the structure was just so monotonous that I just found myself having to take breaks, otherwise I knew I was going to get bored and eventually start to dislike the game. It's a really badly done structure, and it definitely needs looking at. And the story mode structure isn't the only problem. The difficulty spike in the game feels very strange. You see, the first two races are very easy. You'll have little trouble beating them, even on hard and expert difficulty. But the GP in the first area is another story. It's really hard to win. and I think I know why. The issue is that this is the first area where you only race against one other team, so that other team is targeting you 100% of the time, whilst in Area 2, the AI will target both you and the other AI-controlled team. Then in the next area, a third team is added, and then a fourth. So the further you get in the game, the more targets there are for the enemy AI, not just you. The game has a very sudden difficulty spike, but it reduces over time. And this doesn't even factor in player progress and player ability as they get better at the game. It doesn't feel like it gets harder. The game feels like it gets easier, and I believe it's because the AI has more targets to go for. They're not just going for you. And this does actually become a major issue in the very last area. In the final area of the game, the difficulty just collapses because the game finally tries to do something different. In this area, Eggman replaces all the racers in the game with egg robos. But what I found out was that if you ram the robots, even with a very weakened speed type, the robots just explode and they're removed from the track for several seconds. This allows you to effectively clear the entire track of opponents and get such a large lead on the enemy that they'll find it nearly impossible to catch you unless you make a major mistake. The difficulty just becomes a joke, but by far the most egregious issue with the adventure mode is the final mission, because it goes against the entire design philosophy that has been taught to the player across the entire adventure mode so far. What do I mean by that? Well, here is the final map for the final area of the game, and in every other area shown so far, the player is shown that the exit is always the space which is closest to the right side of the screen. So in the final area, which obviously doesn't progress to another screen because it's the final area, you would think that the final story mission is this spot. Everything in the game up to this point makes you believe that that is the final story mode mission, but it's not. It's this one. Upon completion, the player is given the final story sequence and then the credits, and then has to return to this area to complete the side missions, despite the fact the final story cutscene heavily implies that this whole area has just blown up. It just seems so strange to finish the story mission out of nowhere to complete the game and then have to return to complete 2 side missions. And as a result, it kind of feels like the ending is a bit of a letdown because of these decisions. And the sad part of all of this is that the game in the final mission actually introduces something brand new. And initially you're really curious, you're genuinely concerned that, oh wow, this might actually present a challenge. The game introduces a Death Egg robot as a new racer, and unfortunately you're actually not able to drive this racer even in offline local play. You only see this racer in this one mission, and it's a huge racer. You genuinely think that this is going to be a major threat. Long story short, it's not. It's an extremely simple opponent. The first time I raced against it, I dashed ahead of it and I never saw it again during the whole track. In fact, all of my races finished in the top 3 places. It was such a disappointing final race. But after you complete this mission, you're told that the robot has effectively gone nuts and is about to destroy the reactor on the airship, and then the airship will blow up. So why is the final mission not set after this one, in which you're effectively chasing down this robot, trying to destroy it, like, say, a final boss? It's such an obvious thing that could have been an awesome, unique moment, but instead we're just told, oh, by the way, guys, that robot you raced against, which didn't really do anything, has gone mad and it's about to destroy the airship. Oh, the game's over now. And to further compound this disappointing ending, the Death Egg robot cannot be selected to race. Not even in offline mode. It's such an odd decision. And on top of this, even when you beat the game 100%, you cannot select Team Eggman to be used in the story mode. It seems like such a huge oversight that just doesn't seem to be any excusable reason for this. So there's one final thing that I would like to talk about, and for some reason some people are a bit upset at the idea that Dodenpa has invented an engine that runs off the power of teamwork. This isn't actually as silly a concept as you might think. It's done because it's actually a metaphor to the gameplay. Now, I freely admit that this might be a bit of a stretch to make this link, but I do see it and it is there. Basically, Dodenpa invents an engine that's powered off teamwork. And what do you do in this game? You are 3 individual racers that have to use teamwork in order to power yourself to victory. Your 3 cars are essentially engines that powers your team to victory using teamwork, the team-based actions. So if you're one of these people that got upset over this plot point, you really don't need to be. I want to very briefly mention the weaponry, because the weapons in this game are more or less reskins or redesigns of the previous weapons from the last few games, which is fine. They were okay weapons that had a variety of effects, only I think that they might have tweaked the weapons a little bit in order to make them a bit more easy to use. For example, the rocket wisps are the dumbfire weapons in this game, kind of like the boxing gloves or the firework from the previous titles, but I've noticed that the number of times I've actually hit opponents with these weapons, especially when going around corners, seems unusually high. It leads me to suspect that they've either increased the hitboxes on these weapons or given them some very minor homing ability in order to increase the chances of you striking your target. And whilst this might seem like a minor change that doesn't really offer a benefit, it does significantly drop the difficulty and it makes for a more aggressive online experience. So whilst I'm talking a bit about weapons, I really want to talk about the team ultimate moves. It's well known that if you activate them all at once, they last for a longer duration of time, which is great for encouraging communication between players online. But in a single player game, whilst the AI bots will trigger their move the moment you do, if you save the move and go around the lap at least once, I've noticed that the AI will almost certainly activate their ultimate move regardless as to if you do. And this for me is really poor. Often, if I'm more than halfway through the course and I finally get my ultimate move, I'll save it for the final lap in order to make it to the end of the course without being stopped. So if all of a sudden my team of AI bots suddenly use theirs against my wishes, it's incredibly frustrating. But I find this move has its own set of problems which make me just yearn for the return of the all-star moves from the first 2 games. The first problem I have is that when it's activated, it's incredibly difficult to hit any other racers. Compare this to the all-star moves, which in the past they all had a weapon effect. It would either lock onto other racers or create an area of effect attack, making these moves incredibly devastating to opponents that were caught in them. In this game, however, the player must strike the other racers, and due to the increased speed, it's very tricky to do this most of the time. Another issue I've had is due to the extreme high speed nature of the move. It's quite common that if you hit a ramp when this move is activated, you'll overshoot the track and lose the move and all your speed when you respawn. And this is further compounded by another problem. If the player travels so fast and they get to a really tight turn, if they crash into the side of the track, the player's speed is reset and they never reach the ultimate speed despite still being under the effects of the ultimate move. But the biggest issue for me is the fact that every ultimate move is the same for every racer and every team. It has a very negative impact over every character and even every potential DLC character should they choose to add future characters to the roster. I've already explained why it's more fun to unlock a new character over an upgrade, but in this game, even if you bring new characters in, the excitement for them is never going to be the same levels as ASRT or even the original ASR. In those 2 games, part of the excitement and the anticipation for a new racer was discovering their all-star move. In ASRT, you also had them transform vehicles, but the all-star move was the one thing that everybody wanted to see. But in TSR, even if they announce 15 new characters, you know before you even select them, they're going to have the same ultimate team move. It's never going to be as exciting to get new characters and use them like it was in the previous two titles. So I'd now like to talk about the online experience, and I'm honestly very surprised at how well the online experience actually is. I find that due to the nature of the team play mechanic, it actually translates very well into a multiplayer experience. It means that players must cooperate with one another, or else they'll just finish poorly in the final ranking. And there have been times where I've been a player online and my teammates have just refused to share items, and this has resulted in a significant placement drop when the results come in. But when I've played in games where my fellow racers have formed a unit, when racing with strangers that have no microphone and no means to communicate, I find that you can often win or place very high because the team play mechanics are designed to work without communication. A player can see which members need help based off the glowing effects from a stall, the trail left by a slipstream, and even the in-game radio, which prompts a user that someone on their team needs help or is offering an item. It's surprising how well this works in a multiplayer environment, even if a player isn't confident to use a microphone or just doesn't have that equipment. But online as a whole does have a number of problem design decisions, which I think really need correcting, or else it is going to harm the game in the long run. The first issue is if a player finishes the race, the game puts them in an automated sequence in which the camera follows them around the rest of the track. At this point, the game waits a few seconds and begins a 2-minute cooldown timer for the other racers to complete the race. Those who have finished the race are given no indication of how much time is left on this, or how many racers need to complete the race. There's also no indication as to where the other racers are on the track, and there is no indication as to whether these racers are even moving around the course. And this screen, this sequence where the automated driving is happening, it looks almost like the game has soft locked up. And I've seen online games where people have finished first and other racers have come in sometimes quite a while after. They've shut the game down because they're sick of waiting, or they genuinely believe that the game has crashed. It's a significant design flaw. Those who won the race should be given an indication as to what's going on, or just a way to leave the game. But the most obvious solution by far, reduce the time. Why is it 2 minutes? Why isn't it 30 seconds? There is absolutely no justification for people to wait 2 minutes on a screen with no feedback and no method to actually quit the race. It's boring, and it's greatly misleading players into thinking that the game has soft locked. This means that if someone is in your race and they're particularly bad at the game, or even worse, deliberately waiting out the full 2 minutes, those people who won the race are trapped with no way to escape. And another issue with the online comes from when every player finishes the race. The first problem is the commendation screen. It's a mandatory screen which you cannot skip, and the length of time to get through this seems to vary depending on an unknown factor. Sometimes I've seen it as high as 30 seconds, other times I've seen it as low as 10, and you cannot skip this screen. It does nothing. Even if you get picked as the best player, there is nothing. So what's the point? For 30 seconds, you are stuck at a pointless screen. And then when the commended player is selected, it's another 5 seconds to move to the next screen. We then get to the results calculation screen. You cannot skip this, and you cannot speed it up in any way. This takes 40 seconds to complete. And you then go to a final winner's podium screen. This takes an additional 8 seconds. In total, depending on how lucky you get with the commendation screen, after you finish your race, you will be waiting from between 1 minute to 1 minute 30 seconds just to get back to the lobby, with no way to speed it up. And that doesn't include the extra 2 minutes given to other players to finish the race. Potentially, you could be waiting almost 4 minutes to get through the results screen. This is just inexcusable. There's no way low budget can justify this. It is completely poor design. There is no excuse for this. 2 minutes to finish a race is far too long. It has to be reduced. There also needs to be a way out for players, or give players the option to skip the results screen. You can instantly skip and the game will calculate the results in single player, but in online mode, players are forced to sit and wait. And all of this doesn't include the 60-second countdown and loading time to start the next race. The online can see players waiting 4 to 6 minutes between races. This, for me, is the one thing that I think is going to harm this game in the long run. Players are just not going to want to wait this long to start another game. They're going to get bored and they're going to quit the online. Please change it. So the final part of this game that I would like to talk about is the soundtrack. And what can I say? It's outstanding. It really is one of the best soundtracks for years. But we do need to give a special praise to Sumo for how they actually use the music in this game. It really shows some clever thinking. One thing that I've noticed is the music starts to speed up the closer you get to the finish line. And this has the subtle effect of making the final moments of a race feel faster and more frantic. It's a great way to manipulate the player into feeling that the race is far more intense than it actually is. But as good as the music is, and as clever as Sumo are in the way they've used it, there is one glaring issue. You see, unlike ASRT, there is no way to select what music you want to listen to, even in local offline play. And whilst you may think, well, this isn't really a problem, most races aren't very long, it's certainly a problem in time trial and mission modes if you're replaying the same level over and over or trying to beat the platinum time trial ranks. Especially when you hear the same song for the 100th time. I think a lot of people are going to start to hate Crush 40 when their time trials are over. Regardless as to which stage you pick, the game will play their song and there is no option, at least that I can see, to change the track. It's an okay song, but after the 10th time, I'm just begging Sonic to change the radio. So I know this has been quite a long video, but I really wanted to go into a lot of detail and touch on a lot of areas with this one, because I do genuinely really enjoy this game, and I think at worst it's a good game, and at best it's fantastic. I've really enjoyed Team Sonic Racing, and I really hope that this isn't the last time we see Sumo Digital get their hands on the Sonic license again. I feel that the team play mechanic really does set this game apart from other races in the genre, and it offers people an alternative experience to traditional racing games which are available, and it's honestly very fun in both single player and multiplayer modes. But that said, as much as I love Team Sonic Racing, it does have some very annoying problems. Now, some of these problems are clearly due to a lack of development budgets, which has meant not enough time can be spent on certain things, but others are just seem to be down to a few poor design decisions. But when Team Sonic Racing works and is at its absolute best, it's completely brilliant. It nearly sets a new expected standard. Not quite, but it gets very close. And we've seen through how they use the track Booze House to tell a story, as well as being an exciting track, and even Market Street, which has so many alternative routes and little fun things to do, just how incredibly talented the team are behind this. But at the same time, there are instances where tracks just don't appear to have had much thought, and those wonderful little extras are just completely missing. And this to me feels like the budget constraints really did impact this game. It wasn't much a lack of talent, it was a lack of money and time. So I hope you've taken something positive from this. And I hope if you are in a position to do something about this, you will take a look at the issues I've raised and not be put off by the criticisms. I don't mean to come across as someone that is just completely slating the game. I don't. I genuinely love it, but I do think it has problems which do need correcting as soon as possible. On the whole, Team Sonic Racing is a case of where at its absolute core, it really and truly is a lot of fun, and it will provide you with a highly enjoyable experience. But that said, I can't deny it does have problems, and when you compare it to its predecessor, the lack of budget really does show. It makes it look like a step down. And I think the obvious comparison I can make comes from this. This is what happens when you complete a Grand Prix in Team Sonic Racing. It's a static victory screen. Here is what it looks like in All Stars Racing Transformed. And I've actually sped up this footage. It's night and day. But that said, at its core is a fantastic piece of gameplay, which I would honestly like to see return. But next time, I hope it's given the same budget and care that its cooler dad had been given. See you next time. Hey guys, my documentaries and editorials take hours of research and development time to complete. They would not be possible without the incredible support from my patrons and donators. If you'd like to help the future of this channel and join my team of awesome backers, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Details are in the video description. But if you enjoyed the video and would like to support in a non-financial way, please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click that like and bell notification button. And please share the video with others who you think might be interested. I also post content to Twitter and have recently opened the Badnik Mechanic Discord server, so feel free to come and say hello. But most of all, just thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time out to watch the content I produce. It really does mean the world to me. Thank you.